Thank you for tuning in to the Practical Preservation Podcast. Please take a moment to visit our website, practicalpreservationservices.com, for additional information and tips to help you restore your historical home. If you've not done so, please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, and also like us on Facebook. Welcome to the Practical Preservation Podcast, hosted by Danielle and Jonathan Kepperling. Kepperling Preservation Services is a family-owned business based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, dedicated to the preservation of our built architectural history for today's use as well as future generations. Our weekly podcast provides you with expert advice specific to the unique needs of renovating a historic home, educating by sharing our From the Trenches preservation knowledge and our guests' expertise, balancing modern needs while maintaining the historical significance, character, and beauty of your period home.
Today on the Practical Preservation Podcast, I have Mike Kennedy with me from Lower City Joinery. Thanks for joining us today.
No problem.
Or me. I tend to talk about myself in the plural. So tell me about your background.
My background, I guess, like geographically, I've lived all over the country. I grew up in small town-ish Saskatchewan, like a prairie town. Moved around a bit to when I graduated from high school. I moved off to Vancouver. Met my wife there, and she went to Japan, and I went to Montreal. Did some university in Montreal, and Montreal is where I got my first woodworking job. And I started in art framing, and then we moved to Toronto. And from Toronto, we were there for about 8 years when we moved to Hamilton. Professionally, I've run the gamut. I've been a baker, an art framer. I worked in new build window and door manufacturing. And then it was once we moved to Hamilton and I started my own business that I began to get into heritage woodwork.
Yeah. Okay, I had like three thoughts when you were going through that. Yeah. I know about was it Saskatchewan?
Yeah, Saskatoon.
Yeah. I know about that because there's a Hulu show with the. Yeah, so that's the only reason I even knew that name. And then, but I right out of high school went to culinary school, so I was a baker for several years. So
awesome.
Yeah. And
it's
then
a great skill.
When you were window and door manufacturer, were you manufacturing for like Norwood or Lowen?
No,
Oh,
it was like really like top notch, like high end.
Oh, okay, like custom.
It was all full custom.
Yeah. Okay. I was just curious. I get curious.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, very good. And so, what you said that you started your own business once you moved to Hamilton. Why did you choose like classical woodworking based on like all the other experiences that you had?
So I got interested in classical woodworking, I guess, when I was still living in Vancouver. Mm-hmm. I was just a hobbyist, right? Okay. And I was young. I didn't have a ton of money. Living in shared houses with people. There's no reason to get. I watched a lot of like This Old House and Yankee Workshop kind of stuff and home improvement things, and they were really heavily focused on machine woodworking, mm-hmm. and that was really not practical,
right?
For my situation. So as cool as I thought it was, and I was interested in it, it made a lot more sense to invest in a few saws and mm-hmm. chisels and just kind of get into it. So I kind of just came into it because that's what I could do.
Right.
And then I think I discovered Royal Underhill's, the woodwright shop, and that just gave a really great foundation to the whys of why things are built in such a way. You only have to assemble so many IKEA dressers to recognize that maybe things were done better in the past.
Right.
And it just kind of made sense. I like things that last, right? It's a sort of you don't like things that are temporary and become disposable. So kind of leaning into that. Really, when we moved to Hamilton, I was interested in starting a window and door shop. I was not interested in heritage at the time.
Okay.
I did not enjoy working in old buildings.
Oh.
I thought they were cool. I thought they were beautiful, but they were a pain in the ass.
Right.
Because just, for all of the reasons that
Yeah.
it's a special skill, dealing with, a foundation that has, settled
Yeah.
over
The
120
shifting,
years.
the nothing
Nothing's
square.
square,
Yeah.
nothing's plumb.
Right.
There's been so many bad decisions made along the so many layers of drywall. You never know if you're going to hit a stud.
Right.
Trying to fix something. So I found it really frustrating. But we kind of got steered that way. I was asked in when was it? In 2013, to sit on a panel. It was a speaking series hosted by the Hamilton Burlington Society of Architects, and they wanted to. The topic was the importance of using local craftspeople.
Mm.
And kind of the gist of that is local people
Right.
understand like important things like the weather, and so what materials are most appropriate,
Right.
and some really basic stuff like that, and then the importance of working with tradespeople directly and not just sort of ticking boxes in a catalog.
Right.
And it was during that panel that a couple of the other fellows on the panel were in heritage, and the woman hosting it was worked for the city in heritage. And so that's where I began to get really exposed to the ideas of restoration and what was possible. And some jobs kind of started to come our way. I was like, okay, I'll give this. I was definitely reluctant at first, but
Right.
the more we were exposed to it, the more kind of came to it. There's a small pool of people who do this work.
Right.
And particularly in our region, there's not a lot of people. And so the city of Hamilton has to kind of like work through all of us, right? They don't want to be seen to be like focusing and favoring.
Right.
So they were happy to start very carefully putting projects my way. They really were testing me for sure.
Right.
Giving me some pretty minor projects to begin with, but then they started to kind of build from there. So we've had a great relationship.
So this is one of the questions I'll ask later, but we can talk about a little bit now. Is your work like public and private entities, or?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. We run the gamut. It's really fun to get into that or to the public stuff. Once you're working, it's really fun to work with architects and designers and that sort of thing. Right? They really bring more to it than I can bring on my own. Right? They think about this as much as someone in my position does. And so they've got some real ideas about how something should be handled, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think I think we do both public and private too, and there's benefits to both. But they both have their own challenges. I think, at least based on my experience, usually like private, they maybe need a little bit more hand holding, but then there's so much more bureaucracy on the public side that like I drowned in paperwork.
I love working with homeowners too. They're so enthusiastic.
Oh yes, yeah.
They're often, they will have a door that they've just tolerated for 30 years that's falling apart, and they can't get rid of it. They can't replace it with a stainless steel door or just another vinyl atrocity.
Yeah.
And when they find out that someone can take their door and bring it back in several weeks, and it's looking and working the way it should, it blows them away, and they're pretty grateful.
Yeah, we have those experiences too, and I'm sure people who restore things do, because we'll walk in and they're like, we need a new door. I'm like, you don't need a new door. I mean, if you want a new door, you can get a new door, but you don't need one.
Yeah, and that always throws people for a loop. We get that with windows all the time. Doors that they wanted to have them restored. Windows, it hasn't even occurred to them.
Yeah, I think that all the marketing that's gone into window replacement.
It's the worst. It's absolutely the worst.
Yeah. So how did you start your business? You moved to Hamilton and then you just kind of started getting jobs, or?
Pretty close. I moved to Hamilton and I did have a job. It's funny when you live in Toronto. It's it's the biggest city in Canada, and so you don't have a very clear idea of what's it's like outside of that bubble.
Oh yeah.
And I thought I did get a job at a shop that was between Hamilton and Toronto, but I did not realize that it was so close to Toronto. I was driving to the edge of Toronto every day.
Oh goodness, yeah.
It was 3 hours of commuting in a day if there was no accidents and no traffic. There were some pretty ugly days. So that wasn't going to fly. So I just started like jobbing around town, doing like, kind of any, even just handyman stuff.
Yeah.
And then a few months into that, a friend had a building, and he suddenly had a tenant, and so he needed a facade. And so we sat down and designed a facade, basic structure of how that was going to go. And we moved all my tools up onto the second floor of this building and just started pounding it out. That went really well. It was great.
Yeah.
People were really happy to see, like a proper facade, something that
right. Was it like a storefront or?
Yeah, storefront.
Okay.
Yeah, a storefront. With like a nice display window, nice doors to get you in, and a little bit of like dynamism. It was it looked good, and it wasn't just like pulled out of dimensional lumber.
Right, and that makes all the difference.
It really does. And it wasn't just another aluminum or steel storefront. It's just more class and just bland. And so from there, the fellow who owned that building, he had a squash farm up at the family farm that he had a friend moving into. A friend was coming back from out of province, and he was going to use that as a studio, and I managed to wheedle my way into that. And that was me for a year and a half or so. And then we made a big leap downtown. We kept we were doing a lot of cabinetry, some furniture, and the occasional door and window, but I was really focused on doors and windows as the primary output of the business. But yeah, then we moved into downtown Hamilton. There's a historic building. It's not, I guess, downtown. It's the North End the original industrial area of Hamilton. We moved into a 1900 factory, just a big old. It was the site of the Imperial Cotton Factory, Cotton Center. Is that what it was called? And so it's like we've got 14-foot ceilings. We've got 12-foot windows. A whole wall is completely windows. It's an amazing space. So now,
that's great. For light in a shop is the best.
Oh God, yeah. This is actually our second shop in the cotton factory, and the previous one, it was not ideal. It was a third the size. It was on the second floor. So getting
materials and then getting everything after it's done out. Oh my goodness.
It was ridiculous. And we did not have the best light. So I think like in the 80s, the government was giving incentives to like these larger and decommissioned factories or semi-decommissioned factories to insulate their windows. So essentially putting them up with some sort of fiber insulation. And that's what my shop was. I was there for more than a year before I managed to convince them to pull off. Please pull off.
Can we open some windows? Our old office was in, and the shop was there too, but the shop had windows that open. But the office part, somebody had thought it would be fancy to put, modern insulated windows that don't open, just full light,
Oh, wow.
And then the air conditioner wasn't great. So it was miserable in there. It was miserable. It was like an oven. I'm like, so that's my number one requirement. Like, we have to have windows that open. People probably think I'm crazy, but it's one of my rules.
Good rule.
So, we talked a little bit about who your clients are, but then what geographic areas do you serve?
Yeah, we mostly serve the Hamilton region. So we go to Toronto sometimes. We go south to Niagara sometimes. But we're pretty focused on Hamilton. Hamilton is it's an old town, so there's lots and lots of work here. We've sent doors to Quebec, and we've sent doors, or we're about to send doors to Saskatoon, which is I find hilarious. But what's interesting about that, I guess, is that there's no one there doing it.
Right.
Doing this kind of work, you can't get. It's a heritage property at the University of Saskatchewan, and the doors are rotting, and they're just replacing them, but they want them replaced properly. And there's no one locally who can match profiles and just get it right. And
Right.
so we're having to ship them. How far is it? It's about 5,000 kilometers. Which seems absurd to me. I can't believe that there's no one there
that could do it, that could replicate a door. Yeah. That is, but we find that too. We travel regionally for work too, because there are a limited number of people that do it, probably more than you have, but it's a limited number. So we find ourselves traveling too. But when you, if you're building the doors, do you just ship them to them and then somebody else installs them?
When it's out of province, we build and ship.
Okay.
We've traveled, 5 or 6 hours out of town and sort of stayed at someone's cottage. And when we were doing restoration work there, we went up and pulled all the windows, and then we went back up once they were.
And that's I think one benefit that we have too, is that even if we're working away, oftentimes they can bring things back, work on it, and then take it back, so they don't have to live there. Yeah. So, and I guess we kind of touched on this a little bit, but what makes your business different than the other businesses that you're around?
Right. It's this is one I always find tricky. But I think that we're really we're genuinely interested in heritage and in, I think, more so just in good woodwork.
Right.
This is a real problem in the business, is that I am not a businessman. That is not I'm very interested in doing good work.
Right.
And so that's so we're able as a whole shop to really discuss things. And it's you're in heritage, you understand this. Your shop is a bit of a lab. This stuff isn't written down in manuals, so you've got there's a lot to figure out. And that's fun, right? That's one of the things that's really cool about this sort of thing. It's not just so much of contemporary building is just following the manufacturer's instructions.
It is,
and that's so boring. And it has really led to a degradation of the trade. Right? There's a time when being a carpenter.
I've heard it described as after World War II, when the building industry really changed, that they developed everything to the trades to become product installers.
Yes.
And rather than having to understand how the whole building works together and how all the systems are all interconnected.
Totally.
Yeah. And so when I heard that, I'm like, that made complete sense to me. It was like a light bulb.
That's exactly it. Yeah. That's sort of that level of manufacturing that kind of came out of wartime.
Right.
Firing.
Well, but it made a lot of good factory jobs for people, but it also created a very disposable society that we're still that we're still living in now.
Entrenched in.
Yeah. So I think that living, I think that it, going back to when things were built to last, and we didn't just expect everything to be, almost free, so that we could just, replace it when it breaks.
There's an expectation that things would be repaired.
Right. Yes. We were actually, my husband and I this morning when we were having breakfast, we were just talking about that, because I needed to get something fixed, and I'm like, this should be able to be fixed.
I lose my mind when something breaks and then I can't get it fixed. I can't find a local repair person. It's got to be shipped out of province. And it's like, are you kidding me?
Right.
Fix this.
Yeah.
This is expensive. Um,
And they just want you to get a new one because that's better for them.
and it's and it does just lead to this whole idea of disposability and
Yeah.
replacements. The idea of maintenance free, right? It's what not.
There's no such thing.
No. um, and the builders of the past were thinking that this bottom rail might need to be replaced in 80 years, 100 years, right? They were prepared that their work would outlast them, and that when it did fail, someone could replace it,
right?
Replace that part.
Which and that's my other like big thing within that I'm trying to highlight more and more, but that intersection of preservation and sustainability, because it's very green to be able to repair things.
The greenest building is the building that's already there,
right?
There's a building nearby, and they've won a lot of awards for meeting their LEED certification and all that, and they threw away all of the original windows. Nothing wrong with the windows. They needed storms. They could have had storms.
Right.
That, to me, that's that would have been so much more exciting, right? It might not have flown in the contemporary architecture industry, because it's taking it more seriously, right? It's not just ticking the boxes of installing Pella's latest triple pane thing. It's taking something that's already there. It's not manufacturing something. It's putting the money into the skilled trades. So it's the skill
and the money staying local. Yeah.
The money stays local. There's just so many ways to have done that better. So it's stuff like that.
I think that those certification programs are often very short-sighted and look at products rather than the components of the building.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's something that people can feel good about, but it just keeps manufacturing going.
Right. Yeah.
And not a healthy sort of manual labor manufacturing.
Yeah, definitely. So tell me about some of your notable projects.
Okay, notable projects. I think one of the first things that came to us that was really exciting was it came from the city of Hamilton. One of the city's founders or more significant people, Sir Alan McNabb. Is that right? What am I getting? I'm getting confused. Anyway, it's at the Dundurn Castle. It's sort of a neoclassical mansion, prominently in the city as you roll into town. And during Canada's centenary, a bunch of money got dumped into upgrading things and fixing what had become run down. And so a lot of things were replaced. And we were hired to replace a replacement door.
Okay.
And so we were able to go through the whole building and locate sort of the likeliest candidates for original doors.
Right.
And then we replicated profiles for those, and kind of incorporated that into the design.
Oh, very cool.
Photographs or anything. So we were doing our best to reverse engineer what would have been there, and then bring it up to higher building standards. It's definitely a jewel in the city's crown. Dundurn Castle. It's as you come into town, you can't help but see it. They've got lovely grounds, and it's not far from my house, so it's nice to have some.
You can walk by and say, "I did that."
And it's the door that everyone passes through who does a tour.
Oh, very cool.
So that was pretty cool. Another city property is the Griffin House. It was built in 1827 and bought in 1834 by Ennerils Griffin, who was an escaped black slave from Virginia.
Yeah.
And it was in his family up until 1984.
Oh, very cool.
And at that time, it was given to the city to take care of. So we worked on the door there. Something that had happened maybe in the 90s, they replaced the upper two panels with glass. For some reason, maybe they were splits in the panels, but they replaced those with glass. So the first thing that we did when we got the door was replace those with glass. And we tried to embody our best early 19th century craftsmen in replacing those. Then those went back, and then really within the year, somebody went and kicked the door in.
Oh goodness.
So nothing was stolen; it was just sort of kicked in, and but the door was wrecked. The lock rail was split. The latch style was broken beyond repair. Oh wait, no, the latch style was fine. That it would just split nicely along the grain, and we could simply together. And then but the hinge style had twisted really badly, and so the fibers were a mess, and so that had to be replaced. And that was just like we were talking, that sort of that repairability of something. It was like I drilled out the wedges and pins, slipped off the style, laid it out a new style, and slipped it back on, drove my pins and wedges, and painted it. Right. It was like we didn't have to get rid of this. We were able to glue things up that could be glued up. It was a small Dutchman repair, and then this simple slip off, slip on. And then we worked with a local heritage hardware guy, and he made sure that we got just everything, the bank rights, and so that was nice. It was like one of the oldest doors I think it is the oldest door that we've worked on, and it's just such a cool story with
that is and that, like you said, it broke along the grain. We built two types of windows that had to get tested at a laboratory, and it was for a lead project, but anyway. But we were sitting there, and the fixed window, we were like behind the glass, and the wind, they were like up to like category 5 hurricane, and the it started to give. And when they stopped everything, and they're like, oh, you way surpassed, the standards, and they're like, and then they were looking at like the joinery held. The only thing that broke, the grain started, or the wood started to give. And I'm like, well, of course, like the wood's more flexible than the joints are. So it makes sense to me that if somebody's kicking in the door, that the wood would break along. Yeah. That's funny. So, what do you wish that you knew when you got started that you know now?
Oh yeah, it's just the basic business stuff. I wish I know just how seriously I needed to take that. When you're building and designing and selling everything yourself, it's really, really easy to let the office slide. Yeah. And now we're beginning to get that sorted.
Yeah, when I interact with contractors that don't have offices, I feel bad for them, because I'm like, you work all day and then you still have to go like deal with whatever. Like I think that would be really hard. So and I even sometimes struggle, because I have so many other different things that I have to do. It's not that I can just focus on the business stuff.
It's when it all ultimately falls at your feet, it's impossible to not kind of get pulled every which way. I wish I was able to spend more time on the bench and less time in the office. But
yes.
It's a good sign that the business is succeeding as it is, and so I have to spend all this time at the desk.
I think that's hard though, especially if that's your passion, to give that to have to give that up a little bit to be able to focus on stuff that's not as fun. So what trends or challenges do you see in preservation?
The challenge is I think the old one. It's and it's always going to be there. I think that people think new is better, right? Mm-hmm. I have a friend in heritage, and she spent a lot of time and money restoring the windows in her home. Uh-huh. And then a few years later, she moved. Right? She got a good opportunity to move to another place. Yeah. So, and the person who bought her house, before they moved in, had replaced all of the windows with vinyl casement windows. And it's just tragic. It's like it was. It's so unnecessary. I've had the opportunity to talk with home inspectors, and they're like, you gotta stop telling people to replace windows. Right. You can point them to studies show restored
Right.
window and
Yeah.
all the reasons that we know.
Yeah.
That restoring is better. You're never gonna make your money back, and you're better off to just
No,
bump
you're going to replace them again in 7 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest challenge, is just getting people over that idea.
Yeah, that marketing, the marketing dollars. Yeah.
Expanding that idea so that people are talking about that. I live downtown Hamilton, which is an older area, or older part of the city. So people I surround myself with are much more open to the idea that old is good, right? There's a real aesthetic appreciation of the buildings down here, and so I think people they want to know this, right? Those are the people who will like stick with their door that isn't working for 40 years.
Right.
Can't imagine getting rid of it.
Yeah. But yeah. And I also think they probably tend to be more like ecologically minded too. And so I think that helps with that too. Yeah. Although some people, that are geared that way then would think, oh, we're helping the energy efficiency if they don't really understand. So yeah, there is a double edge to
that education. Just getting that education out there, I think, is the biggest thing. That's the biggest challenge. In terms of trends, and it's counter to that, is that I think that we are making some penetration into people's minds about what is possible, and that we don't have to throw things away. Things can be restored and made just as good as ever.
Right. Yeah. And I think that the internet helps that. Yep. I think being able to find like-minded people, I think, and that's like kind of that double edge too, because then the crazies also find each other. So everybody finds things they're interested in.
I think like to the point of like the changing idea of what's possible and the greater awareness of heritage. There's a block of buildings downtown. They're pre-Confederation buildings, and just a full street wall. It's an area called the Gore, and they overlook the little park right smack dab central downtown Hamilton. And the company that the development company that bought them had planned to demolish them, and then and just build some sort of newfangled condo,
right?
And there was a lot of protests, and so the city slowed them down, and then they came back with a plan that incorporated certain heritage elements, which was not very good. But they've come back once again, and this company that is primarily interested in making money for its shareholders, is now turning to restoration. So there is I think people are beginning to see the value.
Right. Yeah, there's a building here that there's a big debate. The hospital, which is the biggest employer in the city. So of course people are trying to oh, if we don't let them have what they want, I'm thinking they're not leaving. But anyway, that's there's this bank of buildings that they want to tear down to build a newer kind of apartment. I don't even understand what their plan is. But I was talking about, and I've been thinking about it because it's in our neighborhood. So I went over, I looked at the buildings. I'm like, well, yeah, the buildings have been modified, but they're not beyond like somebody could bring them back. And they're special. Like it's like 2 carriage houses and then the tavern that went with it.
Oh wow, cool.
Yeah, they're really cool. And I'm just like, they like, if they tear it down, it's gone. Like, and so if we just slow them down and maybe get them to incorporate it into their design or do something, maybe then, but I think it's that slowing it down, because if everybody just gives them a yes and a rubber stamp, and I think that's part of the problem, is that they've been kind of allowed to do that in the neighborhood all along. Like they've taken blocks of not entire blocks, but they buy building by building, and then they like, oh, we want to do this, and the city's been kind of letting them, but now they're down to these buildings, and I'm like, I don't think you should let them, like, and maybe you shouldn't have let them 15, 20 years ago either. So I do think that it seems to me that there's more people willing to speak out now, that there is a balance between that economic development and then retaining the built heritage that we have.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, is there anything that, as we were talking about, that you wanted to share that you didn't get a chance to?
Nothing really comes to mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining me today. How can our listeners contact you?
I guess globally, people can check out what we do on Instagram. We're at Lower City Joinery. And anyone regionally who wants to get in touch about a project can email me at mk@lowercityjoinery.com.
I call my husband MK, but that's for Mr. Kepperling. So anyway, well, thank you very much for coming on with me today. I enjoyed our conversation.
Oh yeah, totally, Danielle.
And I do enjoy seeing your work on Instagram. So
oh, thanks so much.
Yeah, very good. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Practical Preservation Podcast. The resources discussed during this episode are on our website at practicalpreservationservices.com/podcast. If you received value from this episode and know someone else that will get value from it as well, please share it with them. Join us next week for another episode of the Practical Preservation Podcast. For more information on restoring your historic home, visit practicalpreservationservices.com.